There's a reload interrupt mechanic in Helldivers 2 that I'm sure most of you already knew existed and may even routinely use, but you might not have known exactly how it works, and so you might not be using it effectively or to its full potential. It's that thing where you start reloading but then can interrupt the reload by switching weapons or diving, and then when you start reloading again, the time it takes is much shorter. It's most useful with weapons like the machine gun, where you stop moving in order to reload, often resulting in your face getting eaten by bugs, where instead of that, you can do the reload in little chunks, which is often much safer. Well, I've been spending the better part of the last few days experimenting with this system, trying to figure out exactly how it works, including details like the time taken to reload each weapon, and the number of reload stages that each weapon has. In other words, how many times a single weapon's reload can be interrupted before the reload is complete, and exactly where those interrupts need to happen. And honestly, it's pretty interesting, and it's totally changed the way I think about how I reload some of the weapons in the game. This video is going to focus on stratagem weapons because those are the ones with the longest reload times, and so this information is most useful for them, but just so you know, this is possible with primary weapons and sidearms as well. So let's jump into it, and we're going to talk about the reload interrupt mechanic in Helldivers 2, and we'll go over all of the results from my testing. Alright, so I'm going to start by showing you the results of all the testing that I've been doing. In this spreadsheet, we've got every single stratagem weapon in the game, as well as information on the reload time and the reload stages for all of those weapons. The first thing you might notice is that we have reload time and stages for both full reloads and partial reloads. So just quickly for anyone unaware, in Helldivers 2, the amount of time it takes to reload your weapon when it's totally empty is usually a bit longer than the time it takes to reload when it's only partially empty. And actually, if you're wondering, this column here shows exactly that reduction in time. As you can see, most weapons get a reduction anywhere from 15 to 30%, whereas others like the grenade launcher and flamethrower get no reduction at all. So for those two weapons, reloading a partially empty weapon doesn't save you any time. Probably because they're not really magazines. I don't know, I'm not a gun guy, so yeah, don't ask me. Okay, so we've got the time and the number of stages for all of the stratagem weapons. So we'll start with the example of the machine gun. This weapon takes a whopping 5 seconds to reload a full magazine, and a still quite substantial 4 seconds 15 or 4.25 seconds to reload a partial. If we take a look at the reload animation on both full and partial reloads, we can see that they're pretty similar, but there are a few differences in terms of the order that everything's happening in. The most significant to my eyes being that this thingo here gets lifted up at the start of the partial reload, whereas in the full one, it happens at the end. However, this order of sequences isn't the most important thing at all. Actually, what I think is most important is that they each have a certain number of what I call reload stages. And interestingly, like most other weapons in the game, they both have a different number of stages too, with the full reload having 2 stages and the partial having 3. 2 reload stages means that the reload can be interrupted once, just between both stages, and 3 reload stages means that the reload can be interrupted twice between stages 1 and 2, and again between stages 2 and 3. On the machine gun, the first interrupt point on both is right here after the first magazine is ejected and just before the new one is retrieved. And on the partial, the second interrupt point is right here after the new magazine is retrieved and before he feeds this belt thingy into the thingo. The most important thing to know is if you try to interrupt too early before the magazine comes out, when you resume the reload, you'll have to start again from the very beginning. And if you interrupt too late, you'll have to start from after the ejection, but you need to sit through the new magazine retrieval part again. So the best time to interrupt is always just between 2 stages. Okay, and it's at this point that I just want to stop and commend the developer Arrowhead for their insane attention to detail. Like, watching these reload animations, which I've done an absolute ton over the last few days, it's just a beautiful thing. As I said, I have no experience with guns at all, but I find this kind of amazing to watch. All of the sounds they make as well, it's just so damn cool. So yeah, massive kudos goes to Arrowhead for their incredible detail here, just amazing work as always. Okay, so now that we understand how the reload stage and interrupt system works, now let's go through every single other stratagem weapon and I'll show you where all the interrupt points are on all of them. First up is the heavy machine gun. This weapon has 3 stages on the full and 2 stages on the partial. Stage 1 is magazine ejection, stage 2 is retrieval, but it finishes really late, about here after this thing comes down, and just before stage 3, bolt pullback. And then there's the Stalwart. This is the weapon with the highest number of stages in the game, 4 for full and 3 for partial. Stage 1 is magazine ejection, stage 2 is retrieval, stage 3 is the belt feed thingo, and stage 4 on the full reload is the bolt pullback. Next up, the Anti-Materiel Rifle. This weapon has 2 stages for full and just 1 for partial, meaning there are no interrupt points for partial. On the full reload, stage 1 is both magazine ejection and retrieval. You can't actually interrupt in the middle of those, so the interrupt point is right at the end of retrieval. And then stage 2 is the bolt pullback. And then there's the grenade launcher. This weapon is a bit of a strange one, in that whilst it does have 2 stages for both full and partial reloads, the actions for both reloads are slightly different. In the full reload, stage 1 is new magazine thingo retrieval, and stage 2 is the bolt pullback. And then in the partial reload, stage 1 is magazine thingo ejection, and stage 2 is retrieval. And the next weapon is the flamethrower. This one's probably the simplest reloading weapon in the game, with 2 stages for both full and partial reload, which are also both identical in terms of the animations. Stage 1 is ejection, and stage 2 is retrieval and this screwing action. Okay, so those are all the kind of normal stratagem weapons with comparable reload systems. Now let's briefly talk about the exceptions, those being the weapons that reload via a backpack, and also the laser cannon. Starting with the Recoilless Rifle, this can be reloaded in 3 stages. The first again being ejecting the expended rocket, the second being the retrieval of the new one, and the third being this part. The main thing to note about this weapon is that if you interrupt this 3rd stage after the rocket goes missing from the ammo pack, you will actually waste that rocket. And you can even go through the entire backpack like this, wasting every single rocket you have. I don't know if this is a bug, I did mention it to the developer, but I haven't heard back from them yet. But yeah, be really careful with this one. Then there's the Autocannon, which has a totally different reload system from any other gun in the game. With the Autocannon, reloading from a completely empty weapon reloads first one magazine, then the other. So rather than being a single reload, it's more like 2 reloads in one. The first reload actually has 2 stages. If you interrupt it here after the first magazine goes in, when you resume it, it actually does this additional action and then finishes the reload really quickly. Then the second reload, where you put in the second magazine, has just 1 stage and can't be interrupted. And then finally, the two weapons that don't have any stages or interrupt points at all, the spear and the laser cannon. So both of these are just one stage reloads, no interrupt points on either of them. In terms of what to actually do with all of this information, well, for me personally, before I knew how the reload stages worked, I was vaguely aware of this system, but I didn't know exactly how it worked. And so I would often interrupt my reloads thinking that when I resumed them, they'd just pick up from where they left off. However, I found that that often wasn't the case, and now I know why. I was missing the interrupt points. And whilst it isn't really practical to be fully aware of exactly which reload stage you're at whenever you're out in the field surrounded by enemies, I've found for me personally that it definitely is feasible to at least be aware of the most obvious stages, those being the magazine ejection and the magazine retrieval. Now I know that most weapons have these two stages, at least somewhere in the reload process, I can keep an eye out for them. Then, as soon as one of them completes, I can dive for my life to get some distance between me and the enemy, and then when I have time, quickly finish up the reload. So I don't think it's that this information is a total game changer that's going to massively alter the way you play Helldivers 2, but it definitely will make your reloads more efficient. And particularly with those weapons like the machine gun where you need to sit down in order to reload them, for those weapons, I honestly think it transforms them from barely usable into actually totally viable. And now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go rock out with my machine gun. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know down below if it was useful or freaking boring. I don't know. I found it really interesting. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if not. And yeah, see you guys in the next one.